Center. I believe that David Segal is around the corner here. Former city council member, former state rep.
How's it going?
Player on the national stage in national politics.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate having us, and we've got our camera
Yeah,
over
let me know
here.
exactly where I need to
Yeah,
stand.
stick
So
your right foot here.
here.
We'll talk to folks here. We'll go directly to them. I know you like the direct access here. And I kind of wanted to talk with folks a little bit before we kind of come back to Rhode Island. What you've been up to on the national stage, since Demand Progress, everything that's going on with that, so folks can say, hey, I remember David. What's he been up to?
Well, thank you for asking. So I run a group called Demand Progress, and we're constructed a little bit like a Move On. It's probably the most similar group that people might be familiar with. We have a couple million people across the country whom we organize around issues of internet freedom, democracy reform, trying to minimize the nefarious influence of corporations over our national politics and things like that. And so in this particular moment, the thing I've been working on all day and for all the last many weeks
Yes.
has been this question of net neutrality, which is coming up again. It seemed almost settled a couple of years ago.
And how did it sort of rear its head, just under a Trump administration?
Yeah, so I'll explain, I guess, the concept first. So net neutrality is a pretty basic concept. It's that you, the internet user, should be in control of what you want to access online, and that the internet service provider shouldn't be able to manipulate the data flows in a way that benefits them. So if they have a relationship with a particular website where they are paid by the website, or if they're a massive international conglomerate like Comcast owns NBC, Comcast has all kinds of incentives to preference access to NBC-produced content over all sorts of other stuff you might want to access. And so it's a way for them to manage the internet in a way that makes them money, but means you can't do what you want to do with it from an entertainment standpoint, or from a startup standpoint, or, and most importantly to me, from a speech or democracy standpoint.
And so the effort in D.C. right now, who's trying to, as you said, be against this?
So under Obama, we were able to institute very strong rules that went into place a little bit over 2 years ago, and that the courts have upheld. And now with the Trump administration in, his new Federal Communications Commission is trying to unwind the Obama rules and basically turn into the Wild West and let the internet service providers do what they want.
And so this is taking up, what'd you say, 90% of your time, 95% of your time?
Yeah, these days.
Pretty much, because we've been trying to get you in here because, you're still involved with local politics and very much weighing in on things here. So I kind of wanted to just play maybe a little association with you in terms of where things are right now in Rhode Island in terms of progressive politics. And let's start here in the city. Mayor Lorza, let's talk about maybe the Community Safety Act. Obviously, it just got held up here, and I know that it's something that you've been paying attention to. How do you see the city from a progressive standpoint right now?
Well, so I think that start by talking about the people of Rhode Island and the province. I think that they are very progressive and populist in their outlook on the world, and we saw Bernie do extraordinarily well here. I think that his concern about ensuring that government operates in a way that benefits the economic needs and broader social justice needs of regular people and not corporations and not the super elite was really resonant in Rhode Island, and that's awesome. And that's part of why I've enjoyed being in politics here, because there's a lot that is possible. I think the Community Safety Act, the fact that it passed 12-0 on first passage, things need to pass twice at the city council level, gave me a lot of hope, and it's evidence that people on the council are willing to engage in these questions, and was also a function of some pretty impressive mass organizing by people throughout the community. And of course, the fact that the second vote was delayed is concerning to me, but I'm hopeful that we'll be able to come to a resolution and see the language as it passed the first time pass in a couple of weeks when it's heard again.
And how do you think the strong showing from Bernie here is going to play out in an 18, if you will? Take a Governor Raimondo, supporter of Hillary.
Yeah.
There was very much a lot of discussion here about who sort of was supporting sort of the established Democratic, more conservative Democratic candidate. How do you see this playing out in 18 here, both at the city and the state level?
So I think that in Rhode Island, and then also across the country, to the extent to which I'm observing that, you see Democrats tacking in a direction that it grabs onto some of Bernie's rhetoric and tries to speak more to people's interests in having a government that actually does right by people. Crazy concept, right? And I think that some people can carry that message more credibly than others. I think there are some people in the state who are sort of already on that trajectory. and there are others who were maybe more aligned with the elites historically, who are now trying to change their portfolio and shape their image in a way.
Are you referring to someone in particular?
I'm thinking a bit about our governor
Yes.
at a particular moment. I'm sure the same thing's happening at lower levels of governance too. But I think that the college tuition plan, which I am not familiar with all the nitty gritty details, but in broad strokes, I support the concept of making college more affordable. And I'm guessing if I had to take a deep look at it, would probably support her plan in particular. But she's, of course, somebody who historically has been associated with the hedge funds and private equity, and people who most voters don't trust to have their best interests in mind.
So what do you think? Do you think she'll be primaried?
I have as much knowledge as you do, or
I
any other.
was hoping to pick your brain if you've heard any rumblings on the street. I mean, I'm on the street here, but I'm not out on the street.
Right.
Yes.
I think that, I just think we're in a moment where people who make it clear that their priorities are supporting the interests of everyday people in Rhode Island across the country are going to have an advantage during this upcoming cycle. And I think that there's a chance that we'll see more primaries than we would under a normal national political dynamic.
And, we've had Link Chafee in here a couple times. There's been speculation that he might be thinking, what would you think if he said that he was announcing for governor again?
Link's a friend, and there are aspects of his work that I have supported over the years, and other moments I've disagreed with. I'm not going to give you some bold endorsement of any particular candidate over another in this moment. I would like to see what he's talking about, as I would anybody. I think it's just such a fascinating political moment that the table's sort of been flipped over, and it's very important for people to speak very specifically to how they would operate in this political moment, what their priorities would be. But I think it'll be a fascinating couple of years. And
you've been someone who has been, again, in office. Want to toss your hat back in the ring?
I'm very happy running my organization right now and fighting the fights I get to fight every day. And it's especially this net neutrality fight seems esoteric in some ways, but it's so important and just underpins the very channels that make democracy and organizing and the whole broader political framework that I think is so important possible. And so I'm pretty happy to get to play the role that I get to play in that fight.
So would you,
again,
encourage folks to check out Demand Progress to learn more on the issue? Because a lot of folks might hear net neutrality and not have a sense of what that even is.
Yeah, so you can come to our site, demandprogress.org. You can watch, John Oliver did a great segment on this a couple nights ago and played an important role in the earlier 2 to 3 year ago version of this fight. And so I think he's got a very succinct synopsis of it that's meant for people who haven't really thought about it in a ton of detail. But it's also an issue that, while it seems esoteric, more than 4 million people submitted comments in the FCC proceeding last time around. So there's way more resonance than you'd expect for something that's so in the weeds about internet policy, which is because people understand that though there are a lot of technical terms in play, this thing really does impact how we live our lives.
So John Oliver, who's been known to break down issues before, didn't he? He broke down stadium financing here right around the time.
Yeah, he did. Which is good.
He tends to bring that sort of populist approach to things, to really, in a humorous way also, because that's what he does. Back in 15, the POSX ownership tried to get it here in 195, and now they're looking again in Pawtucket, and we're expecting something shortly. We just had the governor on here yesterday, and she said she was expecting to hear something. Do you see that happening if they go to the General Assembly and make that ask and say, we're a collective group of billionaires, but it makes sense to have the POSOC stay here? There was such opposition to it last time, and as you talk about sort of political engagement here in the state, do you see that moving forward?
It is hard for me to know without seeing the specifics of the proposal. I'm really concerned about this race to the bottom that's facilitated by tax breaks. States all across the country are always just trying to poach businesses from one another rather than actually engaging in economic development that makes sense, that actually tries to leverage the great things about those communities and the existing workforce. And so it's just this massive race to the bottom, where the craziest aspect of this that I ever saw happen was the tax breaks for films, where basically every state in the country implemented a tax break for movie production in those states, to the point that California then eventually like instituted its own tax break, billions of dollars. And so like it was, California like had all of the work, and then it started tilting down towards all of the other communities that had created those tax breaks, and then California did too. And now we've got basically the same dynamic we used to have, where a lot of it happens in California, some of it happens elsewhere, but it provides much less public benefit than it used to. And taxpayers end up paying for film production the way they didn't do it at all, hardly like 15 years ago, and I think that's pretty ridiculous. Stadiums are a similar situation. And so under most circumstances I can think of, I wouldn't support a public subsidy, but I do think it is good for the Paw Sox to stand protected.
And not leave altogether. No, when Link was in here, he did talk about, he called the governor's approach, especially 195 and some of the tax subsidies, a candy store economic approach. Now the governor, on the other hand, tries to say, well, it needs to be done because of other states, and then makes the case that she's looking at investing in manufacturing here, and again the free college tuition. So not just looking at the sort of big company and the big ticket items. Can she straddle that line and say she's doing both?
So I think that there are a lot of states are in a trap. Like this is a trap, like where you are part of this war over tax breaks. But there are things that I would trust the rhetoric of like, I wish it were another way more if somebody were trying to make it be that other way. And one really interesting example that came up recently around the stadium question is a friend of mine who's now actually a member of the Assembly in Maryland, where they're considering that the DC football team, whose name I'm not going to name, is trying to play this game with Maryland and Virginia and DC. We're trying to play each of the different states or jurisdictions off of one another to try to get them to bid to offer a bigger and bigger tax benefit package in exchange for the stadium moving to their jurisdiction. And so my friend teamed up with a member of the council in DC. I don't know if they found anybody in Virginia, but to draw an interstate compact to say that none of the three states
we won't be held hostage.
Would give the subsidy. Yeah, and that's how you get out of the trap. That's how you change the game theory and turn it to the advantage of the states and take it away from the companies. And New England could do the same thing. It's really easy to imagine Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut compact where we all would at least agree to stop poaching companies from one another. Patriots tried to do something very similar in the late 90s, where they were playing Boston or Greater Boston off of Rhode Island, off of Hartford. And so we've got ways of dealing with this if we're serious about dealing with it. But I am also sympathetic to the notion that there might be some circumstance where you don't really have another out, and you're being held hostage by the company, and you need to play a little bit. But ideally, you've got somebody in office who's trying to figure out every mechanism in their power to not abide by that sort of dynamic.
Very interesting. Well, there's so many other issues here on the statewide level that I could ask you about. Obviously, as you said, your focus is with demand progress. But apart from economic development, what do you see as sort of the big determining factors, especially this General Assembly session? We're looking at marijuana legalization as, one of the many. What are you keeping a close eye on?
One of my local projects over the last couple of years has been pulling together the Working Families Party alongside a few other partners and now a broad coalition of different groups that are party to it. And a priority for them is the paid sick days bill. And I think that we are very close to passage there. It's an issue that a lot of other states have taken on, and I think there's increasing interest there from leadership of both chambers and from the governor, so I'm very hopeful we see that pass. And that's where I'm putting a lot of, to the extent to which I'm able to stay very active in assembly-related politics, like that's where I'm focusing my time.
And with your focus on net neutrality, obviously you have a focus on the legal side of things. Let's talk a little bit maybe about the AG's office. How do you think that AG Kilmartin did here, and who do you think might replace him as he's going to be term limited out?
So my hope in general is that we'll start to see more attorneys general and local DAs, and that this is there's a broad movement in support of these questions now who are concerned about criminal justice reform and who are not just like visceral, like lock them up law enforcement officers, but who understand that there are a lot of structural phenomena in play that mean that certain people are far more likely to be prosecuted than others, and that we are spending an absurd proportion of our public dollars on putting people behind bars. I'm pretty sure the stat still holds that there are more people incarcerated in the United States than in any other country in the world, including China, which has 4 times the population that we have.
How do you think the Attorney General stands at, the current one from his track record?
I have not done a deep dive into each and every prosecution that he's undertaken. We served together in the Assembly, and I think that on some of these issues he was supportive, and on others he took a more sort of traditional prosecutorial tack. But I could go back and look at old voting records from a decade ago. But I think my guess is, knowing him, that he has been sympathetic to certain of these concerns, but has also has the posture of a more traditional prosecutor in many respects.
And does a lot of it rest in the Assembly? We saw a package pass the Senate last year and languish in the House in the waning days. Do we have any expectation that it could pass this year?
The whispers that I've heard, but they're now a couple months old, is that there was greater hope for passage this year than last year, and not being in the Assembly and not having the most detailed understanding of every aspect of that reform package, what I do remember of it, I was broadly supportive of, and criminal justice reform is something that I spent a lot of time working on during the Assembly, and ensuring that people who, there was this absurd situation where somebody would be on probation and be arrested for ostensibly committing a new crime, be found not guilty of it in court, and still be in jail for that same offense. And so one of the last bills I got through remedied that situation. And so there are these moments like this that they don't necessarily all get at the deepest, most structural elements of what's messed up about our criminal justice dynamic. But I think the package that was offered last year was broadly something that would be positive.
So we're keeping a close eye on that. Obviously, 18 being around the corner, we're clearly in cycle. And now I know you're focused on demand progress. But if you're not going to run anything, do you think you'll be involved?
Yeah, I'll definitely be involved. And a lot of it will be through the Working Families Party, which it came up last cycle and ran. I think the stat was we ran 4 people against Assembly incumbents and won all 4 of those races in primaries, for the most part beating relatively conservative Democrats and installing progressive ones. A lot of them would come out of the Bernie movement and are now doing good work. I'm getting their sea legs only a few months in, but are voting the right way on the issues and are asserting the right priorities around concerns like raising the minimum wage and supporting paid sick days and so on. And I think that we'll be looking for candidates who share those values moving forward.
We'll continue to watch. We've had Georgia Hollister Isman in here. We've pegged her as someone to watch, obviously very politically active, and just the emergence of the party. We anticipate seeing more to come with 18 coming up. So, well, I appreciate your coming in to kind of pick your brain on all things progressive politics, talk about net neutrality. Is there anything we didn't go over that you wanted to talk about?
There are about 10 million other things we could talk about. I will try to get back here without a month of prodding next time around.
Well, net neutrality, I mean, here we are. We're streaming live. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube.
Yeah,
we're on our
site. None of it would be possible.
Yeah, we're in the new world order here, but it's been great. We appreciate the interaction and the feedback from everyone, and I appreciate your coming into the studio today.